Welcome back to the Growth Hacking Culture podcast. Every year, companies spend billions trying to develop the perfect leader, the visionary, the strategist, the decision maker. Yet the data tell us a brutal story. Estimates that managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement and scores, meaning a bad leader directly tanks team performance. One in two employees has quit a job specifically to get away from a bad manager. But the most dangerous failures don't come from a lack of talent or intelligence. They come from a flaw in the wiring of the human mind. They come from the biases that blind even the smartest people. Today, we are diving deep into that blind spot. Our guest, Sébastien Page, has spent his career at the intersection of high stakes quantitative finance and a deep behavioral psychology. As the author of The Psychology of Leadership Timeless Principles to Improve Your Management of Individual Teams and Yourself, he argues that the journey to better leadership starts with not with changing your team, but by changing your brain. So let's get ready to stop leading with our guts and start leading with science. This is an interview that will force us to look a little bit more inwards. Sebastian, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you with me.
Ivan, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. I know you're doing this from Europe. I'm doing this from the East Coast of the United States. We are having a global podcast here. Let's do it.
Oh, that's going to be amazing because I have so many questions. Because what I find the most interesting is that despite the fact that you are not coming from this area of saying, I know about psychology, you are coming from the area that you know about leadership. You come from a sector or industry that is quite amazingly bad at leadership, finance. Sorry to say that, but we are going to tame it a little bit more. And suddenly you come with a lot of science. It's almost like you have spent so much time in order to write this book. Is that correct, Sebastian?
Yeah, I wrote the book because I wanted to improve myself as a leader. And I was stressed at work and I was stressing about stressing. I was telling myself, hey, I've been doing this for 25 years. Why do I still feel this way? And Yvonne, I ended up talking to a sports psychologist and we had a great conversation. And from then on, I spent a few years deep in the research on weekends, on my free time, reading academic papers in psychology, especially positive psychology, also sports psychology and personality psychology. And ultimately, this all led to the book, The Psychology of Leadership. So you're right. I'm a leader in a world where it's very competitive, it's very intense. We promote individual contributors, and sometimes we have weak or lacking leadership. And so here I am trying to merge psychology with business.
You made me think so much about Daniel Pink, by the way. And I saw that Daniel Pink wrote something about your book somewhere. I don't remember exactly where, but I'm a big fan of this guy because the way he introduces psychology is through business and through real cases. And this is something that is quite impressive. I still think a lot about these early times when I was engaged in the corporate world and in this initial training to become a leader or a manager. We were talking about managing teams, but we were never talking about managing ourselves first. And this is one of the core themes that we have in your book, which is quite important. How can we be a better leader if we don't know enough about ourselves, our limitations, our biases, everything that can flow our vision of the true people that we have in front of us, right?
And you know, Ivan, the higher you get in an organization, the more important that becomes because everything you say or do as a leader gets more and more scrutinized, and people take their cues from you. I had a story of a leader who started just wearing cufflinks to work. And 6 months later, half the people on his team were wearing cufflinks. It just is a burden that way. You're on a pedestal because of your role. And so you need to manage yourself and manage your own stress. When I was starting to look into this, my first meeting with the sports psychologist, he started by telling me the story of his best match ever. I should say that sports psychologist, his name is Dr. Daniel Zimmett. He lives in Maryland, where I am here. He also is a pro athlete. He holds 40 national titles in the sport of handball. Now, I know you're recording this from Switzerland. I don't know if you're familiar with the sport of handball. There's different versions of it. I'm talking about the sport that looks like a squash or racquetball, but you whack the ball with your hands.
Yep.
So
Yes.
he's a PhD sports psychologist. He's got 40 national titles. He sits me down and he says, let me tell you the story of my best match ever. And it's fascinating because he remembers every single thing about that match, even though it took place 10 years prior. Just think about that. Like, he's telling me point number 3, the ball hit the side wall and then the back wall, and then it bounced that way. And there's so much passion. At some point, he's reliving that match. He's got a tear in his eye. He says, at this point, I'm on my knees. I made an extreme shot that was impossible. But then it's a complete letdown because he goes nonchalant. Then I lost the next 2 points. And I go, what? You lost that match? And he goes, absolutely. And it still was my best match in my career as an athlete. And then he started explaining the mindset of a sports psychologist. For him that day on the court, it was his best match because he was playing a much stronger opponent and with a mastery focus as opposed to an ego-driven focus. He realized that he was able to play the game at a much higher level. That was much more important from a mastery focus than the scoreboard. Then we got into the discussion of what is that mindset? How do you learn from your losses? It's so fascinating because sports psychologists, they love talking about losing. The entire field is obsessed not with winning, with losing and what you do with the losses. Isn't that fascinating? And then you apply this to your own mindset in the business where everybody's looking at you. You're the role model. If you don't handle your losses well and you don't learn from them when you make mistakes, it's going to transpire to the entire organization. So circling back to what you said initially, you got to manage yourself. And sports psychology is a wonderful way to start thinking about that.
You know, you made me think about two different points. One is that we leaders in general underestimate the power of miming behaviors. You know, that if we observe a leader and he's doing something, a good behavior, a bad behavior, we mime it because it's a way for us to survive, to protect ourselves. So it goes naturally with our brain, with mirror neurons. We copy without knowing, as you gave the example about the handcuffs. So that is, many leaders, they do not know how far it can be the influence that they have on the overall culture, either in their teams or even in a full organization. And the second point is about this wiring that we have about positive results, and looking at them in order to copy and paste again, to do it again, instead of looking at what are the things that we have failed and trying to understand how can we do it better. And sometimes if we have good learnings, to celebrate these learnings that comes behind the failure. But society, our parents, organizations are telling us, no, just think about the wins. And that's a pity. That's a waste.
Yeah, I think there was a famous inventor, I think it was Thomas Edison or something, who said, you know, I'm not like, I haven't found something wonderful. I found 1,000 different things that don't work. And that's how I finally invented the light bulb or something, right?
Indeed,
So,
Edison.
you know, you have to think about it that way. Roger Federer went completely viral about a year and a half ago at a commencement speech in front of students. I guess someone filmed it. It made its way to social media. And what he said was fascinating. And it's all about that mindset and that resilience. He
Mm.
said, I have played 1,500 matches in my career. I have won 80% of them. This is one of the best tennis players of all time, right? But then he looked at the students and he said, can you guess the percentage of points that I've won? Can you guess, Ivan? Roger Federer, what
No.
percentage of points he won? It's only 54%.
Huh.
So the top tennis player of all time, or one of the top tennis players of all time, lost almost half the points. He just had a small edge that he applied consistently throughout his career, which led to extraordinary results. The most interesting part is what he said next. He looked at the students, all these A students, these Dartmouth students, and he said, no matter what game you play in life, you're going to lose. Get used to it. And then he said, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, the best in the world are not the best in the world because they never lose. In fact, they lose over and over again, but they've learned to deal with it.
Mm.
Adapt and grow was his message to the students. It's the philosophy behind a lot of the research in sports psychology, which I think is underrated in business because we don't like to talk about the failures in business. It creates a stress response as opposed to a learning response. And if we're not mindful of how we react to setbacks, we're not realizing our full potential.
Mm. Sebastian, tell me, this problem that all humans have, but more specifically leaders have about when they have biases, like anchoring, loss aversion, or others. Do you see it really like, do you see it across the board in leaders? Is it a real flaw, or most of them are thinking about it, that they are conscious of their biases? And what do you feel is the impact of that not dealing with their biases correctly? Do you see an impact in overall in all the organizations?
We all have biases, especially when we make decisions under uncertainty. I
Mm.
would say the biggest one that I've seen through my career is the failure to differentiate between luck and skill. Let
Mm.
me explain. In a world where there's uncertainty, your outcome is only loosely connected to the quality of your decisions. Let's say, Yvonne, that you and I go out to dinner in Switzerland where you are, and we drink. What's the most popular local wine? Is it Riesling, or what's locally produced in Switzerland, if any?
It depends on the area, but in this part of Canton de Vaud, I would say Gamay type of wine. So it's white
Okay.
wine, Gamay breed.
Yeah, I've had it with raclette. It's really good. I love
Yes.
raclette, by the way. So let's say we go have a raclette dinner and we drink between the two of us 2 entire bottles of Gamay. Bad decision, right? And then I decide to drive home. Bad decision. And I make it home safely.
Mm.
Well, that was a bad decision with a good outcome. Let's say instead I decide to call an Uber or a taxi, and the taxi gets in a crash. That's a bad outcome, but I actually made a good decision.
Mm.
And when you talk about biases that leaders have, when they get a good outcome, let's say it's in investment management and you get really good returns in the markets, you're tempted to think you're a genius. You're tempted to think you made all the right decisions. It's actually quite possible that you didn't follow your process and you made a bad decision. Like, I can put all your money in a crypto meme coin and triple it in 2 weeks. If I keep doing that, like, first of all, I'm going to think I'm a genius, right? But it's a
Mm.
bad decision. Like, it's just gambling. And if I keep doing that over time, you're going to be ruined pretty soon. So this loose connection between the quality of the decision and the outcome always trips not just investors, but leaders. And what's hard too is if you made the wrong decision and you get a good outcome, that's really hard. It's like you made the wrong decision to drive home after drinking your bottle of Gamay, right? But you
Mm.
got a good outcome. Don't think that it's okay to do that. Just have the self-awareness to realize this. This luck versus skill is a big bias. One of my mentors said once, there are only two types of investors, those who are talented and those who are unlucky. And what he meant by that was if you're not outperforming the markets in an investment framework, right? You're in managing money, but you're not doing well. You're always going to say, I'm not lucky. If you're making money, you're always going to say or think you're talented. And that's a great illustration of the failure to differentiate between luck and skill. And if you don't differentiate between luck and skill over time, you won't improve your decisions. You have to focus on the process. It's the same for athletes. We're talking about sports psychology. Athletes may prepare the right way, they may make all the right moves, but they don't control their opponents. They don't control whether the referee's going to be on or off that day. They don't control the weather. They can lose the game based on bad luck, but they have to separate between the two. There's a great book that I'd recommend after all your audience, after you all read The Psychology of Leadership, go to Annie Duke's book, Thinking in Bets. She wrote an entire book on luck versus skill. This is how important it is.
Mm. I'm taking note of that one. While you were talking, you made me think about one of your peers, I would say. Let's call him your peer, Nicolas Tayeb, the famous guy who wrote Skin in the Game, which is, by the way, one of my favorite
Yep.
books. Um, and in some of his books, he talks about this randomness when you do investments, and then there is this parallel that you have created with leadership. So it is luck versus the skill that you are learning. So is it the job of a leader, in fact, to be ready for the worst case scenario, the worst case scenario that can happen to the team or to the organization, and the rest is a little bit of a mix. Like you can have a lot of small actions that do not produce any harm to an organization, any harm to the team, but some others may have a huge impact on what is going to become the workplace. Is that a correct analogy, or I went
Yeah.
too far in the overthinking?
No, not at all. Taleb talks about black swans. And if
Yes.
someone had said there might be black swans somewhere when no one in the world had ever seen a black swan, it would have sounded crazy. And so he has this analogy, which I'm butchering. He's a great author, he's a great writer. But this analogy is that there are things in the world that we don't know, and it's an unknown unknown. Think about the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you want resilience, you need to, in Taleb's, in financial lingo, it would be hedging, right? You need to have something that's built in to prevent the risk of a blow up that could be an event that would disrupt your business in a way that you haven't anticipated. I think a lot of businesses right now, are realizing how AI could completely change their business,
Mm.
right? But 5 years ago, ChatGPT is only 3 years old. 5 years ago, it was a black swan, right? They
Mm.
couldn't know in advance what was going to be so disruptive to their business. And so it's a matter of building the plane so that when you hit the turbulence, which by the way, pilots can't predict when they hit the turbulence, you know the plane's going to withstand
Mm.
and it's not going to crash. So, yes, it's the responsibility of the leader to have built in resilience in their own businesses. Um, Contingency plans or hedges, if you will. So, yeah, I see the link you're making with Taleb. He's an interesting writer. So good one, Ivan.
I love the way he talks. He's a little bit too provocative, but I love that one.
Yeah. Some people might say a bit arrogant, but it's okay. It's entertaining.
Yes. Tell me, so if we had to pick like one of the most effective psychological technique for a leader to build a system, a robust system for self-reflection, and maybe correcting, amending or managing his own biases, what would you recommend? Because we say, I mean, what I have observed is many leaders do not have the time just to think about themselves. They don't have the time or they don't make the time. But that's another debate. How can they start thinking of working on themselves, recognizing patterns on their behaviors?
Love that question. There's a giant opportunity in teams, in business to improve the feedback process. Now let's do an experiment, Ivan. I'm going to ask you a question. And after I ask the question, I want you to tell me right away how you feel. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so here's the question. We've been doing a podcast together for the last few minutes. My question is, can I give you some feedback?
Oh,
how
yes.
do you feel about that question?
That you can. That you can. I would love so, in fact.
Okay, so you're embracing that question. The experiment was, how do you feel about me asking that question? Did you get a little bit of a fear response?
I had the thrill. I had these goosebumps because I'm afraid that you're going to
yes
to cut my head.
Exactly. It's a very threatening question. If someone comes to me and says, Seb, can I give you some feedback? My fight or flight response is activated. I get a stress response. Mm. And that's partly why feedback is difficult. Athletes love feedback. Like, give me feedback, coach. Tell me what I can do better. But for some reason in business, we don't like it. We don't handle it well. And that is the key to improving self-awareness and self-reflection. There is a trick. Dr. David Rock, he's the founder of the field of neuro leadership. He's looking at how the brain is wired and making connections with the field of business leadership. He showed that if you make just one small tweak to the feedback process within your team, the stress response is going to go down by 50% for both the person giving the feedback and the person receiving it. So the riddle for you, Ivan, and by the way, I didn't have any feedback to give you. I just wanted to illustrate how stressful that question can be, right? But so what would reduce the stress involved in the feedback process for both the giver and the receiver? Small trick, kind of a puzzle I'm asking. Do you have any guesses?
If I know
you didn't know the table.
If I knew the intention that you want to help me, that will reassure me maybe.
Yes, I would agree with that. That's not what David Rock studied and proposed, although I think that's a good answer. The trick is to ask for the feedback, and it makes a huge difference. We talked about earlier how everyone looks at how the leader behaves and takes their cues from them. Well, if your leader, if she's going around asking people, hey, can you give me some feedback? Can I get some feedback? Especially if it's forward looking. What should I do better next time? How would you tweak this for the next time? That releases the stress because you're asking for it. It also makes it much easier for the person to give it. So start building a culture within your team where people ask for feedback proactively. I go on a client call with a salesperson. As soon as we're out the door, I'm going to say, hey, how did I do? What should I do different next time? And when you start doing this, here's a crazy idea. You're a leader, ask for feedback from your employees. How am I doing as the leader? That's difficult, but it's actually modeling a behavior that will reduce the stress of the feedback process. Now, I want to tell you though, and I could go on and on about the feedback process. It's not perfect. Most organizations do what we call 360 feedback, which means people fill some form and they give feedback on your performance, your collaboration. And those people can be your employees, your peers, your bosses. That's why we call it 360. There is research out of Harvard Business School by Marcus Buckingham and others in a famous paper titled The Feedback Fallacy that shows that feedback is overrated in a sense. Here I am saying we should improve feedback, but fundamentally it's not perfect. To improve feedback, we need to realize that sometimes it's overrated. 50% of the feedback you receive actually reflects the biases of the person giving the feedback. So it's not necessarily about you. A lot of it is about the person giving the feedback. So that's a problem. And if you're a manager, you have to control for that. As a manager of people, I get anonymous feedback for my employees. I adjust for knowing that there are lots of biases in there. The other thing I would say, Vaughn, about feedback and how to make it better is that this is counterintuitive, may even be controversial. It really doesn't help to focus on the negative. We think of feedback as, I'm going to tell you something where you're doing something wrong and I'm going to help you improve. It turns out the research shows that all that does is it creates a stress response, and it's nowhere near as effective as, here's what you're doing really well, I'll do more of that. In the research, the improvement was essentially flat from so-called constructive feedback, but people improved 17% from feedback where it's positive and it's what you can do better. There's a famous football coach from the 60s and the 70s. His name was Tom Landry. He would get the players in the video room, play highlights from the prior match, show them what they did wrong, and say, look, you got to improve this. And he realized all this was doing was creating stress in the players. And also they were mentally rehearsing their mistakes, which is not a path towards improvement. He made a change. He then started showing the highlights. So if a quarterback had thrown 20 passes and 2 of them were really good, he would actually show the video to the players from these 2 passes that were really good and emphasize that, focus on that strength for improvement. And that, the Dallas Cowboys then won 2 Super Bowl. Like, it really worked.
You have mentioned a couple of things that I find it quite interesting. One, that is related. In fact, we have spoken about Daniel Pink about the carrot and stick. So feedback in the system of organization sometimes doesn't work because the same person who is contributing to help you get better is the one who is going to judge you, who is going to give you either the carrot or the stick. So you don't feel like sometimes receiving that feedback, you try to avoid it because the person, and it's going to be very difficult to come to my manager and ask, give me some feedback, because he will remember that the day of the judgment day, which is either once per year in a quarterly review. And that's sad. The system is not built, as you say, really for feedback. The other thing that you made me think is about that it's almost like we are replicating the moments of pain continuously. So we want to pass on that in order to get better, you need to suffer a little bit, but not with the idea that you have to learn from your mistake. It's more about you have to be punished for the mistake so that it doesn't come back again. So almost like we train a dog, or like we train children. So this infantilization of the employees makes them even worse in terms of motivation. And then this model that we have built on uh, motivation that is coming from the outside, it doesn't come from within the person, right? So the feedback part is almost like a big failure for most of the organizations.
Well, now we're bad mouthing feedback a little too much. It actually is a path.
You
It's
encourage me, Sebastian.
I know it's a path to improvement for sure. It's just not perfect, and there are ways to improve the feedback process. For example, by creating culture where you ask for it. For example, by focusing more on the positive than the negative. But what you mentioned is super important about Daniel Pink. In his book Drive, he talks about intrinsic motivation. I talk about this in the psychology of leadership as well. And I was lucky to have Daniel Pink endorse my book. He gave a blurb for the book cover. But his point is quite radical. He actually claims that intrinsic self motivation is superior to any other kind of extrinsic or carrot and stick, as you describe it, reward, including money. If people are motivated to do the work, to help others for their sense of selves, whatever internal motivation, that over time leads to higher performance. It's all about positive psychology. Positive psychology is so underrated, Yvonne. Most people in society still think of psychology as treating clinical issues, which is super important. Clinical issues like anxiety, depression. But at least half of the scientific research in psychology nowadays is not about clinical issues. It's about the positive side, thriving. What makes people successful? What makes people happy and healthy physically and mentally? So it's so underrated to just draw on that research. That's what Daniel Pink is doing with intrinsic motivation. That is a huge part of what we learn from positive psychology. So I'm a huge fan of Dan Pink. He is such a great thinker and a great communicator. And I think if people in our audience like his book, I hope they will like The Psychology of Leadership as well.
That I hope so too. So, leaders, beyond the obvious traits like arrogance, what is for you, according to you, the most subtle yet destructive leadership blind spot you have observed or you have seen in your research? But I think that you have observed, you have so many good examples in the financial world.
Yeah, look, we all have blind spots. Yeah, I think the most important for high performing leaders is what I call goal-induced blindness. I have a chapter in the psychology of leadership that begins with an Everest story. The literature in psychology is very clear that goal-induced blindness occurs when you become so obsessed with your measurable goal that you lose sight of everything else that might matter in your life, whether it's your personal health and safety or the quality of your relationships with others. That is a huge bias of high-performing leaders in particular. If you want to summit Everest, Yvonne, you have a 4% chance of dying. It's a dangerous thing. And there's plenty of goal-induced blindness that occurs there. You want to make it to the summit, you're risking your life. And because you have goal-induced blindness, you kind of forget about the fact that you're risking your life. This happens in business too. Businesses will cheat just to meet certain metrics. Think of Volkswagen. These are real like blue chip companies cheating on their emission tests. Or Wells Fargo employees creating, this was some time ago. Wells Fargo is a great company, but at some point, employees started creating fake bank accounts because they had a metric, a goal of opening so many bank accounts. And so there are plenty, Enron and so on, like plenty of examples in business of goal-induced blindness. And we're all subject to it. I had it early in my career. Ivan, I almost died. I was traveling nonstop. I was exhausted. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't eating well. And I decided one morning, I lived in Boston at the time, to go running along the Charles River to try to kickstart my health and fitness. And I didn't realize, but that was a really pivotal moment, because I ended up spending a week in the hospital. And at the end of that week, the doctor who treated me said, look, you had an infection. So my body was so run down that I caught a bacteria, right? That apparently went in towards inside my toes. The ground was wet, whatever. But my defenses were down. And he said, you could have died if we hadn't given you the antibiotics that we gave you that have been available for only a few years. You probably would not have made it. I had complete goal-induced blindness. I was not healthy. My body's defenses were completely drained. So once you become more aware of that blind spot and look at things outside of your goals, you start to prioritize what really matters. Number one, ethics. Never cheat, never lie. It's just not worth it. Number two, your health. If you're not healthy fundamentally, nothing else is going to be possible in your life. Number three, the quality of your relationships with your family, with others. Quality relationships doesn't necessarily mean that you go around at work and agree with everybody, but it means that you have trust, you build trust and mutual respect with people. That's a quality relationship, productive relationships. And of course, having love in your life and being close to your family. All these things sometimes suffer because leaders get goal-induced blindness. And by the way, you're going to achieve more over time if you're well-rested, if you have quality relationships in your life, and if you don't lie or cheat.
Here comes the big question, Sebastian, because now you made me think about my personal life back in the days. So when we have a leadership position, sometimes we have excellent perks. We get to travel, sometimes a lot, sometimes it's okay. We get awesome bonuses and we are rewarded for the success. Unfortunately, the price to pay is that at one moment you will have to, nobody will tell you go and cheat and lie, but you know that this is the thing to do because you have to sell either your job or your boss job. And so indirectly, you are going to be nudged to lie, to have a presentation where you really don't believe in that project, but you are showing numbers that have been put there. It's an angle of the numbers, so that shows positive results about your project. So you are basically incentivized to cheat, either because these KPIs allow you to do so, or because somebody asked you to do so. So does it come that if we want to take care of, as a leader, we ambition to be healthier, to have ethics, do we need to take the hard call of saying, fuck it, I go away from this environment. I have to be removed from that environment. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't drop an F-bomb. You might have to edit that out of the podcast, or your podcast rating is going to change with it. You know, the little E they put on the podcast?
Hey,
Anyways,
I know. I got used to that
awesome.
one.
That was awesome. I've always taken a black and white view of ethics. I own the Chartered Financial Analysts charter, and we are trained in ethics. It's just not worth it. It's short-term pain to walk away from the temptation to fudge a number or whatever it is, but it's long-term gain because it's just not worth it in the long run. So if you're in a business like mine, it needs to be black and white, and you have people that will help you. Whether it's people that understand the rules and regulation that can advise you, but it's just, to me, that's a black and white matter. if you slip into goal-induced blindness and all you care about is making a sale, that's a risk for you. And my advice to you is it's black and white. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Take the short-term pain, even if you lose your job.
Mm.
Even if you lose your job, longer term, you're going to look yourself in the mirror and you're going to find another job anyways with better people.
And
I
sometimes
don't
we
know. I sound very dogmatic. I sound very dogmatic about this, but you know, when you're in money management, you have to be like it's one or the other. Just don't lie, don't cheat, and you know, be mindful of this goal-induced blindness.
I don't think that is dogmatic. I think it is the sad reality for some people like me. It took me time to realize that that it was worth the sacrifice. If I wasn't living the life that I was expecting from myself, then it was time to say no and move on, even with this intense fear that you have to lose your financial security. No, you live happier with less sometimes. Your family is saying thank you. Finally, you are here, you exist. Your daughters know much more about you. You take part of their education, and that reward is amazing.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a trade-off. If
Mm.
you foster positive relationships in your life, and Sean Aker, a great positive psychology writer, says that happiness leads to success, not the other way around.
Love that.
So let me repeat that. Happiness leads to success, not the other way around. And so I don't think it's mutually exclusive. There's a famous study out of Harvard that's gone on for over 80 years, 80. I think it's the longest running study in all the field of psychology. And the goal is to measure how people thrive over time. They follow people through their lifetime. You get a survey every 6 or 12 months, and you have to fill it by saying, okay, I feel happy, I feel sad, this is what's going on in my life. And when people started compiling those results, they were surprised that a lot of factors they thought would influence people's self-reported happiness were not significant.
Hmm.
Like they would compare, for example, people who had tremendous success versus people who had lost their jobs or went to jail. And they didn't find like a significant spread in their self-reported happiness. I was like, oh, that's surprising.
Hmm.
And then even like health outcomes, there wasn't a significant spread. There was one factor that was quite significant. And that factor was so significant for people's self-reported happiness. It also led to better physical health over time. And it led to people living longer. Can you guess what that factor was?
Um, I would say satisfaction or something with experience, that you have experience, that you use whatever you have to live experiences, painful or happy experiences.
Indirectly, yes. The factor itself was whether or not people had positive relationships in their lives,
That, oh, yes.
which leads to positive, happy experiences, which is fascinating. Actually leads to like strong health. That's fascinating. Like, there's a whole social media thing going on right now where everybody's hacking, biohacking, finding ways to improve health. I did a podcast where the host convinced me I should try cold plunges. I thought, no, I'm going full social media now. You know, this supplement, that supplement, sleep, you know, paleo diet, meat only, blah, blah, blah. Everything trying to make you healthier. And no one's talking about how positive relationships in your life over time will actually make you healthier,
Mm.
and definitely just help you thrive from a mental perspective, but also from a physical perspective.
Mm.
So
That's amazing.
I encourage people in your audience, if they're interested in this, to look up the book by Robert Waldinger. He's a
Yes.
Harvard psychiatrist, and he's running this study right now. And he also endorsed the psychology of leadership. So I'm trying to pay back my friends who liked my book and endorsed it.
I love the type of tips that you are giving, and indeed, I'm fully with you about this correlation that we have. In order to be a good leader, we have to get to know ourselves better, understand our biases, understand the impact that we may have with our small little behaviors that can be mined by others and can really have a ripple effect across a full organization. The impact that we have in life. We have spoken a little bit more also about something like to foresee a little bit the unpredictable, the variances that may happen in life, these black swans that can happen in life. That is part also of the role of the leader. We have spoken about uh, motivation that comes from within, intrinsic motivation. We didn't speak, but also is correlated to the also the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, talking about the flow, how artists, sportsmen go into the zone, and they can focus and they can thrive and they don't feel like pushed to do more. We have been a little bit bitching about the extrinsic motivation bonuses and all the stuff that doesn't work. The punishing people. We have been talking also about feedback. I mentioned the fact that, yeah, in organizations, sometimes it doesn't work because you are being judged. At the same time that somebody's helping you, that doesn't work. There is a small contradiction. I love all the key messages that you have from your book. If you had to pick one thing from your book, one advice for that leader who wants to start a new daily routine in order to change, be a better person, or be the person that they dreamed of, what would it be?
Okay. If it's, by the way, great summary. If it's daily routine, I'm going to go really basic and say, get plenty of sleep. If it's a general number one piece of advice from the entire book, The Psychology of Leadership, I would say, be mindful of fostering positive relationships in your life. Hmm. And remember that positive relationships doesn't mean being a pushover or an overly agreeable. It means respecting people around you. It means assuming the best in people. It means building trusts between people. It means being close to your family. And it could also mean ending negative relationships. Mm. But I would say that's the number one. By the way, this is a very tough question. The book is 300 pages.
I wasn't expecting that you will pick sleep, but it makes total sense. But it's always the problem that if you are already in a shitty environment and you cannot sleep really when you are crowded, you feel there is a toxic environment around you. You have really a lot of problems to sleep. But you have to work on the root causes that prevents you from sleeping.
Yeah, look, Ivan, I'm not one of those health and fitness influencers, but that is the basics. You need to exercise if you're stressed because it's going to lower your stress and it's also going to make you sleep better. And if you add the third pillar of eating a decent diet, then you have a virtuous circle because the eating better food gives you better energy to exercise. Exercise will make you sleep better. Sleeping better, you actually control your appetite the next day much better. That's been proven. Lack of sleep is really bad. If you sleep 4 hours and you drive and you're sleepy, you're more impaired than if you're over the legal limit for drinking. It's bad for you. It will actually impact your physical health in terms of your immune system and all aspects of health. So you forced me to give one daily habit. I pick one. Just get the sleep.
Exactly.
But then from a leadership and positive psychology perspective, I do think some of us sometimes, because we have goal-induced blindness or for other reasons, we underestimate how positive relationships are important in our lives. So everybody who's listening to this podcast today, go out, do something nice for someone.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, that was really nice, Sebastian. I also recommend, so I'm going to be putting all of these reference because we have mentioned a couple of books that are quite amazing. Some of them I really love. But the main book that you should have with you is Psychology of Leadership by Sébastien Page. So I really recommend it. I'm going to be putting the link to the website just below this. Sebastian, is there another way to reach you out? LinkedIn profile, something else?
Instagram at Sébastien Page Book, or on LinkedIn, I'm very easy to find, Sébastien Page.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. It was wonderful to have really a good discussion. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.